Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. Apologies for rushing in a little at the last minute, but I'm happy to be here. As Alain said, I will be talking about the research and action agenda for gender mainstreaming, perhaps not setting the final concrete version of it, but I look forward to your inputs on it. This kind of discussion that I'm about to give is a product of some of the work that CCAFS has been doing around gender and social inclusion over the last few years, and as well a product of our discussions with EFAD and CARE on the ASAP program. So where are we here? Okay. So I'll open with this table. This is a version of the table that is in the How to Do note. And what it is, it's a combination of the different approaches that all three organizations have in terms of our areas of focus on what we think are really important components of gender transformative agriculture adaptation. So the first thing is roles, looking at gender roles, social norms, what is expected of women and men, what are socioeconomic conditions and so forth. And I know that this has been discussed already by CARE and EFAD. They've also, I'm not sure if there's oh, here we go. Let's see. Do we have it? No, it doesn't work? Okay. Okay, all right. As well, the bottom here, investing in program capacity, I know that's been discussed. So I'm going to focus on really the middle ones. The importance of ensuring women's access and control over resources and information, and to take into account power issues and between genders, but also in a community, and then monitoring evaluations. So in terms of resources, it's actually the biggest one. It's not necessarily, the most important, and I know there's a concern that there's been too much focus on technology for agriculture in relation to development, but I think we need to keep in mind, as Priscilla was just saying previously, women really need to be consulted and have control over what they need to accomplish, what they want to accomplish for their households, for their communities, for their livelihoods. And that includes the resources, technology, information, finance, credit they need to use those different resources. So we're talking about equal access to agriculture and climate information. Also, that women's information priorities are addressed. They may be different than men's, and one of the cases I'm about to talk about will show that. They need equal access to land, water, and forest. They need to have access to market opportunities and equitable credit and finance. And sometimes access to market opportunity means good infrastructure so that they can take their produce to market. But that's not sufficient, of course, and EFAD has just been supporting a very interesting infrastructure project in Bangladesh, which combined infrastructure development for market access and development and poverty reduction with livelihood programs for women to help them set up small and medium businesses in relation to the infrastructure. And then also, use innovative, farmer-led, community-based approaches for capacity building for everyone. In terms of power, it's important to ensure that all decision-making processes, all consultative processes are inclusive, that certain groups in a community do not dominate the access to, for example, an information session or a training session. Sometimes there are gatekeepers. So there are different ways to ensure that all groups within a community have access. And then it's also really important to ensure equal representation of women in decision-making at different levels, in the household, in community organizations, and also in the national level, as we've just seen. And then finally, for monitoring, evaluation, and learning, there needs to be a consultative, interactive process of learning, identifying success factors, defining indicators, what are we looking for in this project? How do we define success? How can we benefit all the members of the community? So that's the overall. So let me just talk about a few examples from both CCAFS and ASAP. So let me make sure I'm on the same slide. Okay. So the ASAP program for the restoration of livelihoods in northern Uganda was a program to partially support gender responsive group activities in access to rural livelihoods and with market linkages, and infrastructure. One of the highlights, so it worked with both women and men to provide access to extension. There's market skills and access, market access infrastructures. One of the interesting aspects of this project was that it used the GALS methodology, which is the Gender Action Learning System, which is a household strategizing, mentoring, visioning approach to work with help both women and men work together to assess their situation, plan together, and decide together how they can accomplish what their aspirations are. This was an interesting example. This is not actually a picture from the program, but it's a nice example of perhaps the combination of tasks working together, of women and men working together. But what they did find in northern Uganda, and I think this is true for many areas, many post-conflict areas, was that there was an endemic kind of presence of gender-based violence, and that was inhibiting the successful achievement of the results of the project, among other things. And so that recognizing that this was something that needed to be taken into account as part of a market program or a livelihoods program brought about a more productive approach and way to support the women in the program. The next one is... Okay, this will work? Okay. The second EFAD project here is PAPAM in Mali. And this is a very interesting project for women. There were two aspects of this. It was to support smallholder farmers to access information, tools, and technologies to help build resilience to climate change and use agrometeorological information such as forecasting, harvest, pest management, drought management. And there was also a appropriate technology component with women, an energy technology component with women. So in terms of the information, this is a very nice example and CCAFS has found this as well in its climate information projects, is that women need access information differently than men. It's partly a factor of access to resources. In many countries still around the world, women do not have access to mobile phones at the same rate as men, and if they do have access, they may not necessarily have control of them. And we see still globally a gender digital gap in terms of ICT. So that's one of the main problems for women to access climate information. So there needs to be different ways to present the information so that women have access to it when they want it and do not have to take on additional time or activities in order to access it. So if they have to travel to access information, that will be something they put at the bottom of their list. If they are not allowed to attend forums where men are present, then they're going to need women-targeted information sessions. CCAFS has found that sometimes, just a public bulletin board is the best way to present information, or to go through synagogues or mosques or at churches or any kind of religious institution where women are allowed to congregate. In Macedonia a while back, what they found was that even if the women were doing a certain agricultural task, the man of the family, the head of the household who is male, would go to the session and then pass on the information to the woman, sometimes more effectively than others. So what they did then was they actually just put out public demonstration plots in the middle of the village with some of the women farmers who were able to do this, and through informal conversation as women walked past, they were able to disseminate the information. So the other thing is that because women do different tasks in the household, they have different access to resources in the household, they need different kinds of information. So for example, even if a man and a woman are both farming in the household, the family labor and the resources will be dedicated first to the male plot, and then secondly, when that's finished, over to the female plot, so the woman's plot. So that means women need information about different kinds of weather. They may not necessarily need onset of rainfall information. They may need cessation of rainfall information. They may need more information about drought. And so there needs to be this recognition of that difference. And as well, a project around technology, biogas and solar technology was introduced with the women in the community, which really reduced their dependence on firewood and fossil fuel. So it reduced their time and labor, decreased the amount of money they had to spend on energy, which they used to, and the increased time and income they used to engage in income-generating activities. So this was seen as, this is a very positive way to promote women's agency. So I have just a short period of time left, so let me just talk about technology for gender equality. Where do I point? Here, I'll just do this. Okay. In one of the projects, women actually took on non-traditional roles. They entered the agribusiness sector. They were able to rent or use tractors, and they started to produce crops at quite a much larger scale than before. And so the question is, how did that happen? It's not clear yet, and I think that's one of the issues for us to be looking at. But they had access to land. There was a community process to allocate collective land to women smallholders, and they were able to take advantage of the finance support and the equipment availability to actually develop businesses. In these examples, we have two other examples of technology. On the left, we have laser land leveling, which is something that CCAFS uses and works with in South Asia. This, in our experience in India, is a male technology. And the reasons, and why can the women not access the tractors here? Well, we're not exactly sure. One of the reasons seems to be is that women are not allowed or feel uncomfortable actually accessing the person who rents out the tractors. They have to send a male member of the family to do the negotiating and the business deals with it, and it also costs them a lot of money. But the other thing is that women in this part of the world, they don't work in the field so much. That's not their domain. Their domain is livestock. And so then I think in this question, this issue, this region, the question is, do women need different technologies that will improve their livestock production activities, dairy, rearing of livestock, or do they need support to be able to enter this domain? And so that's the thing. Now, unfortunately, my time is completely over, so let me just quickly run through the research questions, which I haven't got to yet. So these, I think, are 4 moving research questions coming out of some of these discussions, and I think probably what you've heard this morning. How do you encourage women to move into non-traditional roles and opportunities? What is the collection of services, discussions, community activities, access to credit? What needs to change for this? How do you improve women's access to land? Even if it's legal, even if legally they are allowed access to land, doesn't mean that customary law will allow this. So there is interesting work on connecting up customary law with statutory law to at the community level to actually encourage use and access of land by women. That needs a lot more work. Rental, work with community leaders, so forth. How to move women into more profitable value chains and to more profitable positions in value chains is also a critical issue to ensure that women do not remain at the lowest, poorly paid, most vulnerable position in the value chain. There really needs to be a clear set of strategies and support services. What are women's value chain priorities? Are value chains being developed in the areas that women are present and active? And technologies, I think we've talked about technologies. I haven't had a chance to talk here about women's organizations, but women's organizations can be a great platform for women's empowerment at the local level. Self-help groups in India are one example, the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, but the revolving credit associations as well that we see all over the world. These can be really effective platforms for women to have a voice in their community, to have strength together, and to manage things like larger technologies or run larger businesses. On the other side, what is women's role in mainstream organizations? Does having women in the leadership make a difference? How do we ensure that that happens? How do we get beyond the token women on the leadership committee? I've already asked, is climate information reaching women? Is it useful? Women's position in red meat value chains, I think, is one area of real interest in terms of sheep and goats rather than cows, and maybe more than just managing dairy. And then, as Priscilla was talking about in her presentation, what kinds of policy alliances, what kinds of policy capacity development and work can be done to integrate gender into policy at different levels and into how it's actually implemented at the ground level. So thank you for, I keep doing the wrong one. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your patience.